Jack Smith's evidence on Trump's attempt to foment the violent overthrow of the government of the United States before the election. Thanks to Judge Tanya Chutkan's rulings, we are likely to get a mini trial at which Mike Pence might be compelled to testify, or his previous sworn statements could be made public. That's right. Mike Pence might metaphorically get to hang Donald Trump out to dry. At least we will read about it, or at least much of it, or at least the gist of it. The Supreme Court's corrupt ruling on the bogus concept of presidential immunity notwithstanding, Judge Chutkan, and she should pose for the statue now to save time, has scheduled a series of deadlines for the Justice Department and for Trump's legal whores to file briefs and motions and responses. And the schedule starts 3 weeks from yesterday, and it ends 2 days after the election, and there is absolutely no guarantee that the paperwork about immunity will include the evidence against Trump. But consider for a moment what the documents would have to look like if the filings about what is eliminated by presidential immunity and what isn't doesn't contain any examples of what is eliminated by presidential immunity and what isn't. Each of those documents would then be one word long. Should or shouldn't. Pence, and whether he can testify or his previous testimony is erased by the immunity fix. It was clear at the hearing yesterday, this is central to the idea of the mini trial that Chutkan is now going to undertake. The evidence against Trump will be in the public hands for whatever that is or isn't worth, to some degree, beginning on the 26th of this month, with the first Smith opening brief on the issue of immunity. Trump must supplement his motion to dismiss on statutory grounds a week later, on Thursday, October 3rd. 2 weeks after that, Trump replies to the initial Smith filing, and Smith replies to the Trump motion to dismiss. Smith replies to that on Tuesday, October 29th. Smith has another reply due on Halloween. So if you want an October surprise, pick one. It could come early in 3 weeks or on the 3rd of October. 2 chances on the 17th, another on the 29th. Happy Halloween! Since there is every chance we will not know the electoral winner on November 5th, or maybe not even November 6th, the last of the hearings, Trump's answer to the Smith Halloween reply comes with the ominous timestamp of Thursday, November 7th. I will not wade too deeply into the legal cesspool here. I am not qualified to, and unlike almost everybody else talking about it, I admit that. But Trump lawyer John Laurow's fixation on having Chutkan rule now and forever on what did Mike Pence say and when did he say it decodes this for those of us who are legal illiterates. Lauro yesterday insisted the ruling needs to be made immediately because this is a, quote, sensitive time for Trump. That is, it's the election. Quote, if Your Honor decides, and Your Honor may very well decide that the information relating to Vice President Pence is not only presumptively immune, but immune, then that indictment has to be dismissed. Huge mistake, cheap mouthpiece. Chutkan did not like that term sensitive time at all. She said, quote, I said before and I say again that the electoral process, timing of the election, and what needs to happen before shouldn't happen for election is not relevant here. This court is not concerned with the electoral schedule. I hope you notice the wonderful irony here. We are where we are because Trump's lawyers and his concierge Supreme Court have been so successful at delaying. Now, no more delay. They want an urgent ruling, and Chutkan will not give it to them. As Shakespeare wrote, hoist with his own petard. And if anybody who has ever lived deserves petard to be used in its colloquial meaning, it's Trump. Its colloquial meaning, of course, being flatulence. course, depending on the answer to my next question, all this Chutkan stuff could be academic. I have asked it before, and based upon his performance at the New York Economic Club of New York, I will ask it again. Is Trump dying or something? Among other highlights in his speech, is that the right word for it? Trump began to call immigrants, quote, illegal aerials. He rarely got above a mumble. He was helpful enough to drag his Arlington National Cemetery scandal back into the spotlight. And in so doing, he said that the Gold Star families there were, quote, celebrating. And he said that the event happened 4 days ago when it happened 10 days ago. But no, he's not dying or something. What makes you think that?
With illegal aliens pouring in from countries all over the world. They came in from countries that nobody ever heard the name of that country. Those countries, from their prisons and jails, there is a difference. And the Arab nations, and we're very honored to have some of my friends here with us today from that part of the world. But they're working very hard, despite being here, that I not be your president. They don't like me. Meanwhile, Kamala Harris can't bring down the price of anything because her energy policies are driving up the cost of everything. Everything is up, way up. By the way, we lost 13 incredible soldiers. I got to know the families very well. Spent a lot of time with them 4 days ago in Arlington Cemetery. 3 years ago, they were celebrating 3 years.
Speaking of that, in case you didn't hear, the altercation wherein Trump staffers interrupted the celebration by manhandling a woman staffer at Arlington National Cemetery, physical violence atop our most hallowed ground, the thing Trump just insisted never happened and was made up personally by Kamala Harris, and the military is lying. NPR, which first reported the fight, has now identified the two staffers who verbally abused the woman at Arlington and the one who shoved her. And one of the main lines back to January 6th, quote, the two staffers, according to a source with knowledge of the incident, are Deputy Campaign Manager Justin Caporal and Michelle Picard, a member of Trump's advance team. Caporal is a one-time aide to former First Lady Melania Trump, who left the White House to work for Florida Governor Ron DeSantis before returning to the Trump campaign. He was also listed as the on-site contact and project manager for the Women for America First rally on January 6th, where Trump urged the crowd to stop the steal before some of them stormed the Capitol. Arlington National Cemetery rules, NPR continues, that had been made clear to the Trump campaign in advance say that only an official Arlington photographer can take pictures or film in Section 60. When an ANC employee tried to enforce the rules, she was verbally abused by the two Trump campaign operatives, according to a source with knowledge of the incident. Picard then pushed her out of the way, according to two Pentagon officials. Picard did it. Insert the gif of Sir Patrick Stewart facepalming on Star Trek. The NPR story also includes a non-denial denial now from Trump spokesliar Stephen Chung. And no, they have not released the video they say proves it didn't happen. And no, I'm still waiting for somebody to file to get the security video from Arlington National Cemetery so we can see what happened and who should go to prison for it. But now back to Trump's latest mental day off. What you heard there about the celebration at Arlington came on the heels of a televised moment Wednesday night in which you could see panic actually flare in his eyes as he spoke and dance across his vision before his animal instincts kicked in and he managed to suppress that. I was genuinely surprised Fox did not edit this clip out, or at least paper it over with a wide shot or a cartoon. Without mentioning his name, Trump clearly began to say that the Democratic nominee right now is Joe Biden.
I can't imagine New Hampshire voting for him. Anybody in New Hampshire, because they're watching right now, but anybody in New Hampshire that votes for Biden and Kamala.
How, if you're Fox, do you let that clip run? He clearly thinks. He clearly defaults to Biden. Anywho, Fox, thanks. Trump did manage to get his wits about him. Well, wit. His one wit. In time to do a Zoom speech yesterday to a group calling itself the Republican Jewish Coalition, in which he once again repeated the anti-Semitic trope that Jews are all loyal to Israel, not to the United States or wherever they happen to live. He again said of Democrats, quote, if you had them to support and you were Jewish, you have to have your head examined. And just for laughs, he notched it up a little bit by saying that if Kamala Harris becomes president, Israel, quote, will no longer exist. Well, it will no longer exist for Trump because his only interest in Israel is to get votes from the topic of Israel. Back to the New York economic speech yesterday, Trump also indicated something a little bit more subtle that suggests he's not there anymore, that he no longer can tell the difference between ideas that will gain him votes and those that will clearly lose him votes. He wants, he says, a sovereign wealth fund. You know, like the dictator of Saudi Arabia has, or the dictator of Russia has, with which to make investments, presidential investments. Steal companies from opponents, give money to supporters, or just keep the money for himself. This is a softball for Vice President Harris in the debate next Tuesday that is so slow that she can start her swing now if she wants to. And if that were not enough, there was also this. Trump has now promised a government efficiency panel to save money run by, quick, think the least qualified person for this in the world. A government efficiency panel to save money run by Elon Musk. I mean, if you want money efficiency, you do turn to Elon Musk. Think of what he did in paying $44 billion for Twitter, and now it's worth $12 billion. How much more efficiently can you count and manage just $12 billion rather than that big, big unmanageable pile of $44 billion? Musk, by the way, now mainstreams into the continuing Russian Stoogegate. The Justice Department's indictment of two Putin propagandists accused of buying MAGA influencers with $10 million to spread Kremlin talking points, to sow division in this country, and to try to get conservatives to kill liberals. You will recall that although the DOJ did not name the Tennessee company that was the front for spending the dough here, about 206 American news outlets did name it Tenet Media, T-E-N-E-T. And looky here, from 11 days ago, a tweet by Tenet Media with one of those videos Russia paid to infect the American bloodstream with. Tenet Media, 8/25/24. NASA's DEI trainings, including engineers vocalizing they feel shame for being white and for taking part in white supremacy culture. Responded to by Elon Musk with 2 exclamation points. By the way, Glenn Beck fired his employee, Tenet Media co-founder Lauren Chen, and his company insists that she was just a, quote, independent contractor, and that independent contract has been terminated. She didn't really work here, and I hope you weren't fooled by that. For tax purposes, almost every on-air talent on almost every video outlet, television or otherwise, is an independent contractor. You get hired by your own company, and then your company loans you out or rents you out to Glenn Beck's The Blaze or other dubious outlets like, NBC. Thus, you are not technically a Glenn Beck employee. Now, I'm not saying this is ubiquitous, but I am literally this week celebrating the 36th anniversary of the first month I was an independent contractor while I was the sports director of KCBS Television, Channel 2 in Los Angeles. My contract was with me. CBS's contract was with my company. Back to the main plot. It has been noted that neither Lauren Chen, independent contractor, nor her husband and co-founder of Tenet Media were indicted, which is usually a huge tell for what the analyst Andrew Weissman is guessing, that they had both been charged under seal quite a while ago and that Lauren Chen may have flipped. In which case, those on-camera influencers who claim they're just more victims here, they may want to flee. One place where old-timey media still works is piecing together the nuts and bolts of an operation like Tenet Media, and Will Sommer did it spectacularly well in the Washington Post, and I'm going to steal 2 paragraphs of his. About the $10 million, quoting, "Much of the money went to Rubin and Poole, according to the indictment. Rubin received $400,000 a month for 16 videos, plus a performance bonus and a $100,000 signing bonus, all for a series in which Rubin commented on dumb internet clips that often received just roughly 1,000 views per episode." By contrast, Countdown the Podcast, about 125,000 downloads and views per episode. Back to the Washington Post. Tenet also proved lucrative for Tim Poole, who made $100,000 per episode for a weekly show he hosted, according to prosecutors. The same month that Tenet launched, Poole purchased a skate park in Martinsburg, West Virginia, as well as other significant real estate purchases in the same area. You can take the pool out of West Virginia, but you can't take the West Virginia out of the pool. Back to the Post. Rubin and Poole initially asked for more information about where the money was coming from, prompting the Russians to invent Eduard Gregorian, a fictional Belgian banker committed to free speech, the indictment states. Gregorian's name was misspelled on many documents. This assumes Mr. Rubin and Mr. Poole can read. So what's next here? This clearly is not done. Olga Lautman, Russian intel ops specialist at the Center for European Policy Analysis, offers a speculative list. "I'm going to start a thread on others," she writes, "besides Benny Johnson, Tim Poole, etc., who should be investigated." Are you sitting down? Olga Lautman's to-be-investigated list in part, quote, David Sachs, oh, that's Musk's pal, Glenn Greenwald. Glenn Greenwald? Really? Matt Taibbi. Matt Taibbi? That's Matt Taibbi's name. Jack Posobiec, Scott Ritter, Patrick Henningsen, Alex Rubinstein, Ben Swan, Kit Clarenberg, Truth in Media, George Papadopoulos, Simona Papadopoulos, Western Lensman, Chuck Calesto, Wyatt Reed, Caleb T. Mopan, retired Colonel Douglas McGregor, Glenn Greenwald, I mentioned him already, to continue her quoted list, Tara Reid, I know the name Tara Reid from, Ray McGovern, and Roger Waters, unquote. Roger Waters? Bluntly, I always preferred the David Gilmour version of Comfortably Numb anyway. And speaking of Waters, Fox's Jesse Waters, no relation to any other human, said on the air that he would also be happy to become a Russian propagandist for $400 a month. But by my math, that would represent a raise for Jesse of $400,000 a month. Poor cat turd, left out again. But speaking of Comfortably Numb, let's hear it for the Washington Post. I mentioned it can still do wonders, like the Will Sommer piece I quoted from. On the other hand, from a post-political embed named Dylan Wells, while picking up lunch at a diner in Erie, Pennsylvania, I hope the place is called This Erie Diner. While picking up lunch at a diner in Erie, Pennsylvania, she writes, Tim Walz did not respond to a shouted question about his response to members of his family who are supporting Donald Trump. He ordered a burger, onion rings, and a hot fudge milkshake at Sarah's restaurant, Damn, wrong name for the restaurant. At Sarah's restaurant, just over 24 hours since his last milkshake stop on this Pennsylvania campaign swing. Dylan Wells, Washington Post, reporting. I mean, honest to God, it's like something we left out of the script for my character Tom Jumbo Grumbo in BoJack Horseman. Let me do that as Tom for a second. He ordered a burger, onion rings, and a hot fudge milkshake at Sarah's restaurant just over 24 hours since his last milkshake stop on this Pennsylvania campaign swing. The Post also yesterday had a curious item, an op-ed from the publisher, not of the Post, the publisher of the New York Times. And again, if you ever wondered how we got here, well, we have a new first answer, which is the Russian money. That's one answer. And then the older answer, the myopia of the impossibly rich in whom we have foolishly invested morality. A.G. Sulzberger wrote a cri de coeur about the attacks on journalism by the right, of the threat of a different form of government in this country, of the death, possibly, of freedom of the press, and it was excellent. And he concluded by reassuring the people of this country that he's not going to do an effing thing about it. Quote, as someone who strongly believes in the foundational importance of journalistic independence, I have no interest in wading into politics. I disagree with those who have suggested that the risk Trump poses to the free press is so high that news organizations such as mine should cast aside neutrality and directly oppose his re-election. It is beyond short-sighted, Sulzberger continues, to give up journalistic independence out of fear that it might later be taken away. I'm just going to mention two words here as an aside, AG. Reichstag fire. At the Times, we are committed to following the facts and presenting a full, fair, and accurate picture of November's election and the candidates and issues shaping it. Our democratic model asks different institutions to play different roles. This is ours. Unquote. Well, I'm sure you'll be able to memorize that final paragraph and recite it to the Trump Revenge Tribunal next year. The publisher of the New York effing Times, writing, I have no interest in wading into politics, would be like President Zelensky of Ukraine saying, I have no interest in wading into a fight with Putin. Mr. Sulzberger, I don't care. Tough shit. You are already in it. Trump invaded you and your country. Get off your high horse and get down here with the rest of us and do something about it. Or maybe not. Maybe just go out of business. Because what did the Times actually do for freedom of speech yesterday? It took 2 minutes of Trumpian word salad in which he was asked about what practical measures and legislation he would take to counter the rising costs of childcare, and he rambled on without pause or sentence structure or anything more specific than a vague reference to all that money he's going to get from tariffs. And the Times wrote, he said he would prioritize legislation on the issue. Clean up on aisle 9 for crazed would-be dictator? Nice work standing aside, AG. Also of interest here, the problem with being Jesse Waters is that when you take a shot at Tim Walz for drinking milkshakes, you clearly have forgotten that all Donald Trump does is drink milkshakes. I drink your milkshake. That's next. This is Countdown.
This is Countdown with Keith Olbermann.
Still ahead of us on this edition of Countdown, Fridays with Thurber. And I can't be sure who wrote the first comedic bit about Well, of course, when I was a kid, we had it tough. We had to walk uphill to school and then uphill home. But it might have been James Thurber. This story this week was my father's favorite Thurber story, and it is the definition of subtle hyperbole, if there is such a thing. The different approach to kids and school in the year 1903, when, as you will hear, James Thurber insisted that some of his fourth grade classmates had reputedly repeated the fourth grade every year since 1883. Next. First, there are still more new idiots to talk about. The daily roundup of the miscreants, morons, and Dunning-Kruger effect specimens who constitute today's worst persons in the world. I don't do a very good Yorkshire accent. The Bronze. You know what else isn't pretty good? Middays at MSNBC. Cesar Conde, proprietor. It is not even 6 months now since the Ronna Romney McDaniel incident. You remember that? When Conde and his clueless minions running NBC News hired the Trump propagandist and election denier as a contributor to, among other things, MSNBC and Meet the Press, and then had to fire her 2 days later. The pressure to, in particular, shove the network, MSNBC, back towards the fascist side of the spectrum, the death side of the spectrum, that began in... Well, let me see. When did I start there? October 1st, 1997. That started around October 1st, 1997. But it peaked around, when did I leave? January 2011? Around January 2011. Now, today's efforts are almost matching those peak moments. I went on at length yesterday about Joe Scarborough's campaign to elect, after mainstreaming Donald Trump, and then to enshrine him even after his inauguration. I have had to wade through the personally devastating sewage farm that is Katie Turr's work on MSNBC. I have had to urge the retirement of Andrea Mitchell, whom I was once honored to meet, to work with, and to call a friend. And now there's this. Yesterday, the Department of Justice indicted 2 Russian propagandists in a plot to essentially let Putin and the Kremlin pay American MAGA online and video stars to undermine this nation, to defeat Ukraine, to install a dictator here, to imperil Europe, and to encourage right-wingers to physically attack and even kill left-wingers and moderates. Names were named, and as I mentioned earlier, there are a lot of obvious hints that some of the Americans on this end of the deal have flipped. And other names may be named, and that right soon. And MSNBC's midday live coverage yesterday was almost entirely segment after segment after segment after segment about the court hearing for the son of the lame duck president of the United States. Whatever Hunter Biden did or did not do, it has no impact on the presidential race. It has no impact on this administration. It has no impact on the life of the average American, and certainly it has no impact on an attempt by Russia to overthrow our form of government using the freedoms of our form of government by remote control and bribery like the Russia Stooge Gate story does. The story MSNBC Dayside ignored. Hunter Biden. Because NBC executives watch MSNBC Dayside. See, that's why they do this. And the pressure to destroy MSNBC's very profitable, multi-billion-dollar space in the news market. And oh, by the way, Comcast, MSNBC, all of you there making that billion, you're welcome. They're doing this so that their conservative executives at Comcast can look at their Trumpist friends, or maybe at a Trumpist court of retribution next year and say, but we were covering Hunter Biden, not your friend Putin. This is appalling. This is MSNBC. The runner-up, Senator Ron Johnson. The dead-eyed senator from Wisconsin may be a Russian stooge, but in a larger sense, he is international. He is a stooge of the world. He is so stupid that there is no conspiracy theory he has ever heard that he does not believe, including one he apparently just heard, and while regurgitating it, in media. Why would he be regurgitating media? Anyway, apparently he just heard this, and he admits he doesn't understand it, but he's saying it anyway. Ron Johnson on WCPT radio. The Great Depression was a conspiracy. It was planned in 1929, and it's going to happen again unless Trump gets elected. Joseph P. Kennedy and J.P. Morgan did it once, and they will do it again. Okay, Ron, let's hear it.
Well, one of the interesting revelations of Creature from Jekyll Island is the fact that the Great Depression was pretty well planned. You know, all the big money men were pretty well warned that they were going to finally collapse the system. I mean, they had booms and busts, but they had to finally just collapse the system, kind of start all over. So pull your money out of the market. And so, again, they're the big and powerful. You know, the Joseph Kennedys of the world, you know, the J.P. Morgans of the world, they got off scot-free. They got out of the market in time. So, again, I know this. I know it really sounds like conspiracy theory. I don't completely understand it, but it sure seems, just in my bones, I just feel there's a great deal of corruption and control there that the vast majority of people do not understand. And again, when you're the few people who do understand and you've got the levers of power, bad things can happen.
By the way, Joseph P. Kennedy and J.P. Morgan are going to do it again. Kennedy died in 1969. Morgan died in 1913, and the Great Depression started in 1929. Unless Senator Johnson means J.P. Morgan Jr., or alternatively, Johnson meant the actress, singer, and Gong Show star J.P. Morgan. That's J-A-Y-E. She was born in 1931, so I don't think the 1929 stock crash and the simultaneous depression were her fault. Her performance on the Gong Show was her fault. Senator doesn't understand any of this. He just feels it in his bones. Senator, that feeling in your bones is actually rickets. But our winner, speaking of never understanding it, he will never have rickets because he has no bones. Jesse Waters of Fox, who in his rush to attack Tim Walz has actually managed to attack instead his old boss and Donald Trump. The quote from Jesse Waters, "Women love masculinity, and women do not love Tim Walz. So that should just tell you about how masculine Tim Walz is. The other day you saw him with a vanilla ice cream shake." Vanilla ice cream shake is a sign of lack of masculinity. Here's the problem with that. As I've mentioned many times, Jesse Waters started at Fox as the stalker who went out and did Bill O'Reilly's stalking for him when Bill O'Reilly was too busy stalking his own producers. Jesse Waters was the guy who literally followed around in a car a blogger, a liberal blogger, and told her when he finally confronted her, and she thought she was being physically attacked by some strange guy, and boy is he a strange guy. He actually told her, Amanda Turkle was her name, that O'Reilly had sent him to follow her, to stalk her, and he did this countless times with other people. He was little Jesse Waters, Bill O'Reilly's stalker producer. The thing is that I used to have front row seats at Yankee Stadium, mostly to give the tickets away to Make-A-Wish, but I also went 20, 25 times a year, entertained my friends, spent my money in a very conspicuous and, non-socialist way, sitting in the front row, trying to annoy my former friends at the Yes Network by making sure that their shot of home plate had to include me in it since I was sitting there. And I'd bring my friends and we'd eat all the food and everything else. And often, two people would be seated a couple of rows behind us in the free seats that they could call up and demand from the Yankees because they were too cheap to buy front row tickets or any other tickets. And they used to sit there, two friends apparently, and they used to drink nothing but vanilla ice cream shakes, to use Jesse Waters' phrase. The other day you saw him with a vanilla ice cream shake, which Tim Walz calls not masculine. The two friends were Bill O'Reilly and his friend Donald Trump. And the two of them used to sit there, and I would look over periodically because O'Reilly has always, as you know, fascinated me. And every time he's ever seen me, he's looked the other way, and then when he thought I wasn't looking at him, he would stare at me. So we would have these, I don't think he's looking at me, I'm going to stare at him contests. In any event, all they did, they never talked, they never said anything, they never interacted with anybody. All they did was sit there chain-chugging vanilla milkshakes. But apparently, to Bill O'Reilly's former employee, Jesse Waters, who is openly trying to get Donald Trump elected dictator of the United States, to Jesse Waters, the vanilla ice cream shake favored by O'Reilly and Trump is a sign of a feminine man. You heard him. Jesse, I may soon be selling milkshakes at Yankee Stadium, right? I made an oopsie. Waters, today's worst milkshake in the world! To the number one story on the countdown and Fridays with Thurber, and I don't know when I Went to Sullivan became my father's favorite Thurber story. I suspect it was in the hospital when I was reading to him in the last 6 months of his life. I know I read it to him at least half a dozen times, the first 5 by his request. The last time, he did not request it. In fact, and this is the most perverse kind of compliment I think any writer has ever received, I read this story to him. It was the last thing that I read to him. In fact, it was the last thing he did on earth, was to listen to this story in a state of semi-consciousness. He waited till the end of it. He took one deep, satisfied breath, and he died. I don't recommend this, but I think it does speak to the quality of the writing. I Went to Sullivan by James Thurber. I was reminded the other morning, by what, I don't remember, and it doesn't matter, of a crisp September morning last year when I went to the Grand Central to see a little boy of 10 get excitedly on a special coach that was to take him to a boys' school somewhere north of Boston. He had never been away to school before. The coach was squirming with youngsters. You could tell after a while the novitiates, shining and tremulous and a little awed, from the more aloof boys who had been away to school before. But they were very much alike at first glance. There was, for me, in case you thought I was leading up to that, no sharp feeling of old lost years in the tense atmosphere of that coach, because I never went away to a private school when I was a little boy. I went to Sullivan School in Columbus. I thought about it as I walked back to my hotel. Sullivan was an ordinary public school, and yet it was not like any other I have ever known of. In seeking an adjective to describe the Sullivan School of my years, 1900 and 1908, I can only think of tough. Sullivan School was tough. The boys of Sullivan came mostly from the region around Central Market, a poorish district with many families of the laboring class. The school district also included a number of homes of the upper classes because at the turn of the century, 1 or 2 old residential streets still lingered near the shouting and rumbling of the market, reluctant to surrender their fine old houses to the encroaching rabble of commerce and become, as alas they now have, more vulgar business streets. I remember always, first of all, the Sullivan baseball team. Most grammar school baseball teams are made up of boys in the 7th and 8th grades, or they were in my day. But with Sullivan, it was different. Several of its best players were in the 4th grade, known to the teachers of the school as the terrible 4th. In that grade, you first encountered fractions and long division, and many pupils lodged there for years, like logs in a brook. Some of the more able baseball players had been in the 4th grade for 7 or 8 years. Then, too, there were a number of boys who had not been in the class past the normal time, but were nevertheless deep into their teens. They had avoided starting to school by eluding the truant officer until they were ready to go into long pants, but he always got them in the end. 1 or 2 of these 4th graders were 17 or 18 years old, but the dean of the squad was a tall, husky young man of 22 who was in the 5th grade The teachers of the third and fourth had got tired of having him around as the years rolled along and had pushed him on. His name was Dana Waney, and he had a mustache. Don't ask me why his parents allowed him to stay in school so long. There were many mysteries at Sullivant that were never cleared up. All I know is why he kept on in school and didn't go to work. He liked playing on the baseball team. And he had a pretty easy time in class because the teachers had given up asking him any questions at all years before. The story was that he had answered but one question in the 17 years he had been going to classes at Sullivant, and that was, what is one use of the comma? The commie, said Dana, embarrassedly unsnarling his long legs from beneath a desk much too low for him, is used to shoot marbles with. Commies was our word for those cheap 10% marbles, in case it wasn't yours. The Sullivant School baseball team of 1905 defeated several high school teams in the city and claimed the high school championship of the state, to which title it had, of course, no technical right. I believe the boys could have proved their moral right to the championship, however, if they had been allowed to go out of town and play all the teams they challenged, such as the powerful Dayton and Toledo Nines. But their road season was called off after a terrific fight that occurred during one game at Mount Sterling, or Piqua, or Xenia. I can't remember which. Our first baseman, Dana Waney, crowned the umpire with a bat during an altercation over a called strike, and the fight was on. It took place in the fourth inning, so of course the game was never finished. The battle continued on down into the business section of the town and raged for hours with much destruction of property. But since Sullivant was ahead at the time 17-0, there could have been no doubt as to the outcome. Nobody was killed. All of us boys were sure our team could have beaten Ohio State University that year, but they wouldn't play us. They were scared. Waney was by no means the biggest or toughest guy on the grammar school team. He was merely the oldest, being about a year the senior of Floyd, the center fielder, who could jump 5 feet straight into the air without taking a running start. Nobody knew, not even the Board of Education, which once tried to find out whether Floyd was Floyd's first name or his last name. He apparently only had one. He didn't have any parents, and nobody, including himself, seemed to know where he lived. When teachers insisted that he must have another name to go with Floyd, he would grow sullen and ominous, and they would cease questioning him because he was a dangerous scholar in a schoolroom brawl, as Mr. Harrigan, the janitor, found out one morning when he was called in by a screaming teacher. All our teachers were women, to get Floyd under control after she had tried to whip him, and he had begun to take the room apart, beginning with the desks. Floyd broke into small pieces the switch she had used on him. Some said he also ate it. I don't know, because I was homesick at the time with mumps or something. Harrigan was a burly, iron-muscled janitor, a man come from a long line of coal shovelers, but he was no match for Floyd, who had, to be sure, the considerable advantage of being more aroused than Mr. Harrigan when their fight started. Floyd had him down and was sitting on his chest in no time, and Harrigan had to promise to be good and to say, "That's what I get," 10 times before Floyd would let him up. I don't suppose I would ever have got through Sullivant School alive if it hadn't been for Floyd. For some reason, he appointed himself my protector, and I needed one. If Floyd was known to be on your side, nobody in the school would dare be after you and chase you home. I was one of the 10 or 15 male pupils in Sullivant School who always, or almost always, knew their lessons. And I believe Floyd admired the mental prowess of a youngster who knew how many continents there were and whether or not the sun was inhabited. Also, one time when it came to be my turn to read to the class, we used to take turns reading American history aloud, I came across the word Duquesne and knew how to pronounce it. That charmed Floyd, who had been slouched in his seat idly following the printed page of his worn and penciled textbook. "How you know that was Duquesne, boy?" he asked me after class. "I don't know," I said. "I just knew it." He looked at me with round eyes. "Boy, that's something," he said. After that, word got around that Floyd would beat the tar out of anybody that messed around with me. I wore glasses from the time I was 8, and I knew my lessons, and both of those things were considered pretty terrible at Sullivan. Floyd had one idiosyncrasy, though. In the early 1900s, long, warm, furry gloves that came almost to your elbows were popular with boys, and Floyd had one of the biggest pairs in school. He wore them the year round. Dick Peterson was an even greater figure on the baseball team and in the school than Floyd was. He had a way in the classroom of blurting out a long, deep, rolling B-A for no reason at all. Once he licked 3 boys his own size single-handed, really single-handed, for he fought with his right hand and held a mandolin in his left hand all the time. It came out uninjured. Dick and Floyd never met in mortal combat, so nobody ever knew which one could beat, and the scholars were about evenly divided in their opinions. Many a fight started among them after school when the argument came up. I think school never let out at Sullivan without at least one fight starting up, and sometimes there were as many as 5 or 6 raging between the corner of Oak and 6th Streets and the corner of Rich and 4th Streets 4 blocks away. Now and again, virtually the whole school turned out to fight the Catholic boys of the Holy Cross Academy in 5th Street near town for no reason at all. In winter with snowballs and ice balls, in other seasons with fists, brickbats, and clubs. Dick Peterson was always in the van, yelling, singing, B-I-ing, whirling all the way around when he swung with his right, or if he hadn't brought his mandolin, his left, and missed. He made himself the pitcher on the baseball team because he was the captain. He was the captain because everybody else was afraid to challenge his self-election, except Floyd. Floyd was too lazy to pitch, and he didn't care who was captain because he didn't fully comprehend what that meant. On one occasion, when Earl Baddock, a steam fitter's son, had shut out Mound Street School for 6 innings without a hit, Dick took him out of the pitcher's box and went in himself. He was hit hard and the other team scored, but it didn't make much difference because the margin of Sullivan's victory was so great. The team didn't lose a game for 5 years to another grammar school. When Dick Peterson was in the 6th grade, he got into a saloon brawl and was killed. When I go back to Columbus, I always walk past Sullivan School. I have never happened to get there when classes were letting out, so I don't know what the pupils are like now. I am sure there are no more Dick Petersons and no more Floyds, unless Floyd is still going to school there. The play yard is still entirely bare of grass and covered with gravel, and the sycamores still line the curb between the schoolhouse fence and the Oak Street car line. A street car line running past a schoolhouse is a dangerous thing as a rule, but I remember no one being injured while I was attending Sullivan. I do remember, however, one person who came very near being injured. He was a motorman on the Oak Street line, and once when his car stopped at the corner of 6th to let off passengers, he yelled at Chudy Davidson, who played third base on the ball team and was a member of the terrible 4th, to get out of the way. Chudy was 14 years old but huge for his age, and he was standing on the tracks taking a chew of tobacco. "Come on down off of that car and I'll knock your block off," said Chudy in what I can only describe as a Sullivan tone of voice. The motorman waited until Chudy moved slowly off the tracks. Then he went on about his business. I think it was lucky for him that he did. There were boys in those days. I Went to Sullivan by James Thurber. Baseball team could have beaten Ohio State. I've done all the damage I can do here. Thank you for listening. We are now back to 5 episodes a week, starting Monday, posting nightly just after midnight Eastern, as usual. I'm going to say this again. The ones on Monday are going to be brief, probably less than 10 minutes, so I don't want to hear any complaints. You got me? I'm an old man. I've been doing something like this every day for like 49 years now. I need a nap. I'm giving my nap up so you can have this on Monday mornings. Hush. The YouTube version goes up around 5 a.m. if you're not subscribing to one or both. And you know what? If I'm going to go and do this, you should subscribe to both the YouTube version and the podcast version. Artificial inflation of numbers online? Who'd have thunk it? I'm just going to make a public appeal here. I don't have Kremlin money coming in. I don't have hundreds of thousands of dollars. Now, look, I don't need any more money. If I live to be 132 years old, I'm going to run out of cash. On the other hand, if you'd like to keep motivating me, cash is a good way of doing it. When I don't want to do this, and I think, wow, $400,000 a week from the Kremlin. Okay, I can understand why these idiots are doing it. And I'm not asking for $400,000, and I certainly don't want it from the Kremlin. $400,000 a year from the... We don't have a liberal version of the Kremlin. $4,000 a month from the... $40 a week? All right, how much you got on you? What am I asking from you? Am I asking for $4 a week? No, I'm not. I'm saying just subscribe to the two things and we'll inflate the numbers that way. That'll be my motivation. Oh, there are 250 million people listening to this. Well, it's 250 people and they've each subscribed 1 million times. But I digress. Please share this podcast with somebody who does not subscribe. Brian Ray and John Philip Chanel, the musical directors of Countdown, arranged, produced, and performed most of our music. They have subscribed 271 times each. Mr. Chanel handled orchestration and keyboards. Mr. Ray was on the guitars, bass, and drums. And of course, when I say 271 times each, I'm lying. These are all principled people who have not subscribed more than once, unfortunately. It was produced by TKO Brothers. Our satirical and pithy musical comments are by the best baseball stadium organist ever, the eminently ethical Nancy Faust. The sports music is the Olbermann theme from ESPN2, written by Mitch Warren Davis, a completely ethical individual, courtesy of ESPN Inc. Nothing but ethics there. That's what the E in ESPN stands for. ESPN could underwrite this. Other music arranged and performed by No Horns Allowed. I do have to pay for the advertisements now. Maybe someone can underwrite the advertisements. My announcer today was my friend John Dean. And by the way, for all the joking around about ethics, when I list all the people I know with ethics, John is first, and then there's like a 500-person spaceless gap there until we get to number 2, is actually number 502. I have to figure out who that is. Everything else was pretty much my fault. Maybe I'm number 502 of all the ethical people I know. Coincidentally, that's the 501st edition of Countdown. For this, the 61st day until the 2024 presidential election, the 1,333rd day since convicted felon Dementia J. Trump's first attempted coup against the democratically elected government of the United States. I don't think Trump's on that ethical list at all. He's down there below Ron Johnson. Use the September 18th sentencing hearing. Use the mental health system. Use presidential immunity. The Supreme Theocratic Court has given it to you, President Biden. Use the immunity. I mean, they've said if it's official, it's legal. Go have fun. The next scheduled countdown is Monday. What am I doing? Bulletins as the news requires. Till the next one, if I ever finish this one, I'm Keith Olbermann. Good morning, good afternoon, good night, and good luck.